Okay, hi guys. We have a lot of people showing up a little bit late today. That's all right. So, Juliana put the correct answer to the brain teaser in the chat, so everyone can see that answer if you want. What I'm going to do, though, is go ahead and start talking. Announcements. The quiz and the journal entry are due Sunday, February 27th before midnight. The project request is due on Sunday, March 6th. So that's coming up really quick. So if you've got ideas, now's a good time to go in and post them. You can put your requests in under the project module or content area. I have set it so that you can see comments now. So I know somebody was having problems seeing the comments. They should be available today. All right, so we've been talking about eradicating smallpox and how we were able to use cowpox to get rid of smallpox. But at the time that we started using cowpox to vaccinate, to protect against smallpox, we didn't have germ theory yet. We did not understand what bacteria were. We didn't understand what viruses were. We didn't understand anything about the immune system. So it would take another 100 years to understand how vaccines worked. So we knew they worked. We used them for 100 years, but we didn't know how they worked. And you're wondering why there are pictures of chickens. Nate, go ahead.
Just actually was reading a little bit about I guess it was the philosophy of disease back in the 1300s. They believed, well, one of the ideas was this thing called the miasma theory. It's just interesting to see how perceptions have evolved and whatnot.
We're going to talk about miasma theory when we get to the Black Death. Yeah, there were lots of strange ideas going around. Bad air, an imbalance of humors, miasma. We're going to go into a lot of that when we get to the Black Death. Okay, so didn't leave myself enough room to type on this screen. So let's go to the whiteboard. And I'll explain why there was a picture of chickens. I'd be willing to bet you guys have heard of Louis Pasteur. He was the one who, he did a lot of the early work to understand germ theory and how vaccines work. So he had an assistant named Chamberlain. And Pasteur was very interested in a disease called avian cholera, or chicken cholera. It was highly fatal to chickens. It would kill 90 to 100% of a flock. And caused something called septicemia. Septicemia, you can think of it as an infection spreading through the blood. So all throughout the body, really destroying the circulatory system. So Pasteur was on vacation, and Chamberlain was getting ready to go on vacation, and he was supposed to infect a bunch of chickens with avian cholera. But he forgot. And so Chamberlain came back from vacation, saw the vial of cholera that had been sitting out, and decided, well, better late than never.
Did you mean Pasteur returned from vacation? Because you said Chamberlain.
Chamberlain came back first.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
They
Sorry.
both went on vacation. Yeah. Chamberlain forgot, came back, saw the vial, and infected the chickens with this vial that had been sitting out. What happened? What do you think happened?
Maybe the nature changed, and when I mean nature, I mean like the makeup of the, is cholera a virus? I don't know, but maybe something structurally within the disease changed.
You've
Just
got
a-
some really good ideas, but what happened was basically a lot of the cholera died off. So the chickens got sick, but none died. Chamberlain made up a new batch of cholera and like, okay, well, that stuff obviously went bad, so I'll make some new and infect the chickens. None of the chickens got sick the second time. Pasteur returned and Chamberlain said, okay, I'm sorry, dude. I was so excited about going on vacation. I forgot, I left the cholera out. I didn't infect the chickens. When I came back, I tried to infect them. It didn't work. I tried to grow new cholera. That didn't work. I've really screwed up and I'm so sorry, boss. But Pasteur said, okay, let's do this experiment again, exactly the same way. New batch of chickens, cholera sitting out on the countertop, infect the chickens, and then infect with fresh cholera. And lo and behold, they got the exact same thing, exact same results. Pasteur, yeah, Nate.
No, that was an accident. I misclicked. Sorry about that.
Okay. Pasteur was a very, very clever man, and he realized the dead cholera protected the chickens. And this was the next major step in our understanding of vaccines. And we come up with the quote, chance favors the prepared mind. It was an accident, but instead of going, dude, you screwed up, you're fired, you're out of here, he was like, oh, I wonder what happened. Maybe we should see if we can figure out what was going on there. And now they were able to use, now they were able to develop a vaccine for avian cholera.
What year was this, Professor?
Oh, good question.
I'm wondering, this is happening with the chicken, the cowpox, and this, maybe it's the same time or relatively just different parts of the world. That'd be cool.
No, it was in the 1860s.
Okay.
So it was a good, 1860s. It was a good 100 years after cowpox. Nate.
Yeah, this I actually did raise my hand for. Now, this was pretty much the primitive vaccine. So I know there's like many different types of vaccine technology. I mean, obviously the new mRNA, you have vector, what is it? Live attenuated. What is this one classified as? And is this the same as the weakened virus, or is this completely different since this was a dead virus? I know there's many different like classifications on vaccine delivery methods. I was just curious on which one this would be, what umbrella this would fall under.
This is what we would call killed whole cell. Cholera was a bacteria. I'm sorry I didn't answer it last time when you said you weren't sure. And basically leaving it out on the bench top, on the countertop, caused the bacteria to die.
I thought vaccines were only for viruses.
Nope. We don't have a lot of vaccines for bacterial diseases because we can treat them with antibiotics. So when people are trying to figure out what to create a vaccine against, what target diseases, they ask a couple of questions. They want to know how deadly was the disease. They want to know how widespread the disease was. And so if it's something that's very, very deadly or very, very widespread, but causes some deaths or severe injury to some people who get it, those are the kinds of things that that scientists work on to develop a vaccine. They're not going to go against the common cold because the common cold doesn't kill very many people, even though it's very common. And it's multiple different diseases, actually.
The common cold's a coronavirus too, right?
One of the viruses that causes the common cold is a coronavirus. But there are also what are called rhinoviruses. Rhino refers to nose. And there are a couple of other types of viruses that can cause the cold. Yep. It's one of the reasons we can't come up with a cure for the common cold, because it's a bunch of different things. All right. Screenshot time. Now we will go on, and we're going to talk now about how the immune system works in very simple terms, so that we can talk about how vaccines work. So the immune system is incredibly complicated. So we are really skimming the surface of how this works. We're going to do a very simplified version of this. And, you know, you're welcome to ask questions, but if you ask, I don't understand all the details of how the immune system works. So, all right. There are two parts of the immune response. There's what's called the innate immune response, and there's the adaptive immune response. So we're going to start talking about the innate immune response. The innate part of the immune system responds to new antigens. So what is an antigen? Does anybody heard this term before? You've heard it?
Yes.
Yes.
maybe something that helps you fight whatever is invading your body, antigen?
You're thinking antibodies.
I know that I've heard the term antigen, like for COVID antigen tests. I'll make an inference that it's a marker that can help identify. I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to say something that's incorrect.
You're skating up to the edge of the right answer. So an antigen is something that triggers an immune response. Wow, that's simple, right? Not everything that comes into your body is going to trigger an immune response. But if it does, we call it an antigen. These are usually proteins. And they're usually on the surface of bacteria or viruses. Although we can also use it to refer to things that you have an allergy to. So if you're allergic to pollen, there's something on the surface of the pollen that triggers the immune response, and that is the antigen. All right. So one type of white blood cell, all of the cells that work in our immune system, we call them white blood cells. And so we're going to talk a little bit here about the macrophage. And the macrophage, it sees an antigen. It says, okay, I don't know what you are, but I know you're dangerous. We don't like you. So the macrophage basically eats the antigen. It wraps around the antigen, brings it inside, and then it does something called present. So it takes the antigen in, but then it puts it on the surface of itself. So now the antigen is on the surface of a macrophage, one of our white blood cells. And it transports those antigens to T cells. So these green guys over here are T cells. And it shows the antigen to the T cell. And the T cells do one of two things. Some of them are what we call cytotoxic. We know what this word means. Wait, toxic. You guys know what toxic means. What is cytotoxic?
Cellular. Is that
Yes.
what cyto means? Yeah. Like cytoplasm,
Yes.
cytokinesis.
Yes. Cyto refers to cells, so it is a cell-killing T cell. All right. So the cytotoxic T cells recognize this antigen. They've been shown it by the macrophage. And the cytotoxic T cells start replicating. And then they go out and destroy or kill everything they find with that antigen. So they're like, we're going to go after this antigen. This is the bad guy. We're going to kill it. All right, so that's the first part of the innate immune response. Some T cells become helper T cells. This guy down here at the bottom is a helper T cell. And you see, it's doing a similar thing. It's taking that antigen and it's going to carry that antigen to the lymph system. And in the lymph system, there are B cells. So what is the lymphatic system or the lymph system? Nobody knows. Do you guys know what lymph nodes are? You heard of lymph nodes?
I just know the only real time I've heard of them is like oncology, in terms of like once cancer reaches your lymph nodes. I'm guessing it has something to do with the immune system, although I'm not entirely sure. Also, I've heard of conditions of certain ailments causing lymph nodes to swell. I know there's some in the neck, armpit.
Yep.
That's really about it.
Yep. Okay. So take a quick screenshot. We're going to go back to the whiteboard. All right. All right. So you guys know we have a circulatory system in our body, right? Our heart pumps blood through blood vessels. The lymphatic system is another series of vessels that move material around the body. There is no pumping mechanism. So the lymph moves around. A lot of it is through muscle contractions. A lot of it is just, when new liquid comes in, it kind of pushes the other liquid around. Juliana, yes, go ahead.
I just have one question. So, you're saying the lymphatic system has no pumping system, but like, how would in their vessels, but like, how would this relate to the heart? Because the heart is like a pumping system. So, like, how I know it's like contracting the muscles and that's how it's flowing, but there is a pumping system in your body. So, I'm just yeah. So, how does this all like come together? I guess.
Sorry, I accidentally muted myself there. So what you're asking is, why do we have a second set of vessels that have no pump?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Okay, it's a very good question. So the lymphatic system, one of the major things it does is it takes fluid from the legs and the hands, the extremities, back to the circulatory system. If you think about it, your blood goes down your legs, a lot of stuff comes out throughout your legs. To come back to the heart, it goes into veins, but there's not a lot of pressure in the veins. The pressure is primarily moving the blood away from the heart. So part of the lymphatic system's job is to take excess fluid and just kind of get it back to the circulatory system. But more important than that, it is also part of the immune system. And we have what are called lymph nodes. And lymph nodes are basically widened areas of lymph vessels with a sponge or net-like interior. And this lymph node acts as a filter. So lymph nodes catch bacteria and they catch metastasizing cancer cells. And they also have a type of white blood cell called B cells. And so those B cells in the lymph node, when the lymph node catches a bacteria or a cancer cell, the B cells have an opportunity to go after that bacteria or after that cancer cell. So it's kind of a filter system to try and get bacteria and get those bacteria exposed to the immune system. Does that help with the understanding? Good. Okay. I told you it was complicated. All right, so up to this point, the immune response is fast, but relatively weak. So it certainly can reduce the amount of bacteria or virus, but it doesn't always completely stop things. The next steps are stronger, but they're slow. All right. Let's take a screenshot and go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so here's our helper T cell. It's gone, it's found the B cells in the lymph system. The B cells see this antigen, they know it's on a helper cell, so they know this is a problem. And they start producing antibodies. So an antibody is a special protein that will attach to that antigen. And they are very specific. Hey, go ahead.
I guess, how does the antibody know, does it rely on the genetic information from the antigen in order to create like an antibody that can defeat the foreign body, I guess? I don't know if this is like way advanced or complex, but I'm just kind of curious how the body can create something to defeat it.
Okay. It's not genetics. I mean, it's not looking at the genetics of the antigen, because the antigen is just usually a protein. So proteins are incredibly complicated shapes, and the surface of a protein might look something like this. And so the antigen will form a shape that fits perfectly against that antibody. How it does that, it is way up here. So it's very complicated. And I've learned it, but honestly, I don't remember it. I haven't gone back to look at that since I learned about it in graduate school.
So when you mention that it makes like a perfect fit, kind of like a key.
Yes.
Is that, I know obviously the processes are like completely different, but it's almost reminiscent of how like the spike protein has like a certain shape to, you see where I'm going with that? Yeah.
Yes. The spike protein on COVID has a certain shape. That is, when you talked about the antigen test literally uses antibodies that were, usually they create these in rabbits in the lab, extract these antibodies from the rabbits and use those to bind to the antigen in your sample. And they can recognize when the antibodies have bound to that antigen. Does that clear that up a little bit? Yeah.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem. All right, so the B cells make these antibodies. They can make huge numbers of antibodies. And the antibodies can then circulate through the lymphatic system, through your bloodstream. And when they see an antigen, they attach. Now, the antibody itself doesn't kill the antigen, but it sticks to it. And that is a signal for other types of cells in the immune system that this is something that should be destroyed. It's kind of a, this allows cells that may not by themselves be able to recognize that antigen, but they can recognize that there's an antibody attached to it, and that antibody says, hey, come destroy this cell or bacteria or virus. Is this making sense? Okay, good.
So it's not the body's inability to destroy it, it's the body's inability to recognize it to be destroyed.
That's a lot of it, yes. The body has to learn to recognize every new disease we get exposed to. Yes.
So in reference to, like, my aunt got a heart transplant, luckily, and she had rejection meds. Is
Yes.
that aligned with this in any way?
It
Like, hey,
yes.
don't attack these cells. So it's the opposite process, I presume.
Yes, it's basically suppressing her immune system so that her body doesn't attack the heart, because all of our cells have antigens on the surface. And our immune system, when we're developing before we're born, our immune system learns that those antigens are self, that's us.
Cheers.
And so if you get a transplant later in life, you're getting tissue from somebody else that's not us.
Invaders.
It's an invader. As
So
far as the
every
immune system.
persons are different, or is it like blood type kind of, or is that completely unrelated?
Not your DNA at all. It's just a whole different person's DNA.
Yeah. Blood type is part of it. Yes. Juliana, jump on in here.
It was more like a question. So like I've gotten allergy shots in the past, and like I was like given this, like, I don't know, I guess, like, how does this relate to like allergy shots?
Okay. Really, really good question. Give me a second. Let me dredge up.
Yeah, because like I remember taking like a scratch test, and like, how can't they just, if they can manufacture like a specific shot to give me every, week or so for 6 months up until whatever, then can't they do that with like other like allergens, that are not just like pollen and this and that, if that makes sense?
Yes, it does make sense. So allergy shots can be used to train the immune system not to attack something. And the way they work is by exposing you to very, very small amounts of the antigen. Now, there's a heck of a lot of details into that go into which antigens your body can learn not to attack. It doesn't work with everything that people are allergic to. It doesn't work for transplants. But it's kind of like if someone has an irrational fear of spiders, they're like terrified of spiders. You can get them less sensitive to the spider by meeting them in a safe space, and you talk about spiders. You don't show them pictures, you just talk about them. And when their anxiety gets too high, you back off. And then another week goes by and maybe you show them pictures of little tiny jumping spiders, those ones that have the big eyes that look really cute. And you kind of work to desensitize them. It's a very similar thing. You're exposing the immune system to this antigen. If it reacts too much, you back off. But if it doesn't react very much, you keep exposing it to that antigen until it finally starts going, oh yeah, that's not the enemy. That's not trying to kill us. Does that work as an answer for you, Juliana?
Yeah, that's perfect. It makes sense why you have to like wait 30 minutes after leaving the appointment to make sure that you're not like, dying or anything.
Yes, to make sure you don't have a major immune response. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So what happens next? Some of these B cells and some of these T cells become what we call memory cells. These memory cells remember the antigen. That's their whole job, is to remember it. And these memory cells are why we can have immunity from with vaccinations. Why, when we've been exposed to a disease, we might not catch it again. Different memory cells last a different length of time. So some will live for a couple of months, 6 months. Some will live for a few years. Some seem to persist for our lifetime. And now Nate's going to ask, why do some live longer than others? And I'm going to respond, that would be an excellent PhD project. And you probably wouldn't figure it out, but you might help science as a whole make progress on it.
I have a question, Professor. So how come they can't just take our memory cells and just have them, somewhere and just re-inject us with those memory cells? Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah. So that is one of those things that the scale of it would be a nightmare.
I understand.
So you would have to extract memory cells for various different diseases, store them in a -80 freezer,
Right.
and do that for 320 million Americans and how many different diseases we've been exposed to.
Right. Nightmare. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm sure when you're like dealing with things on like a cellular level, there's a high, like the margin of failure is so like one little thing can throw everything out of whack. So I'm assuming that it's things that seem logical are realistically like 100 times more difficult than they actually appear.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. That is the innate immune response. I'm going to talk about the adaptive immune response. So screenshot, yep, stretch. All right, and I left myself space to write. The good news is this is easier. So if your immune system has seen an antigen before, and there's a memory cell for that antigen, the memory cell can, if it sees that antigen, will give you a fast response. What it does is it kind of, you kind of go straight to the fast part of the innate immune response. You don't have to go through all of the different steps that we've talked about for the immune response. We go straight to the strong response phase of immune reactions. And this means that our bodies can often kill the virus or bacteria before we have symptoms. All right, so I want to type some of this out again. The innate immune response. New antigens. The macrophage sees the new antigen. It eats the antigen and presents it to T cells. Cytotoxic T cells replicate and go out to kill the antigen or anything with the antigen. Helper T cells carry the antigen to the lymph system and show it to the B cells. Put some stars here. Then the B cells also replicate. The B cells make antibodies, which allows the general non-specific white blood cells those can recognize antibody and will kill anything it's attached to. And some T cells and B cells become memory cells. All right. The adaptive immune response, when you have a memory, basically it goes straight to this part of the immune response. And this is, it takes a long time to go, relatively long time to go from here. This is slow. To get through all of this step is relatively slow. If you can bypass that, this is, it makes it a much faster response. And this part is also the stronger response. So this is the relatively weak part of the response. This is the strong part of the response. That's the immune system in very, very simple terms. Questions on this?
I think the movie Osmosis Jones should be like homework, if you remember that old cartoon about the immune system.
I don't remember that.
I look it up. It's pretty clever, I guess.
I'll add that to my little list here. Okay. Woo. Ah. Good time for a screenshot. I'm going to do a lot more typing. So now those vaccines, let me start this. Vaccines, basically, the goal of them is to create memory cells. So that if you see the antigen that was used in the vaccine, you will have a faster, stronger response. And if you have a faster, stronger response, you're less likely to have as many symptoms. You never get the same amount of bacteria or virus in your body. And, you know, sometimes you can just totally wipe it out before it can cause any symptoms at all. So we're taking advantage of the adaptive immune response. And we're going to talk about types of vaccine. I'm going to list them here, and then we're just going to talk about them. There's live, attenuated, killed whole cell, toxoid, component, conjugate, and mRNA. So these are the major types. There are some others, but these are the major ones. So we'll start by talking about live attenuated. Attenuated, or attenuate, means to weaken. So this is a live virus or bacteria that can it can replicate in the body, but it is weak and not able to cause disease, or causes a mild disease. Cowpox, right? It produces cowpox, which is a minor disease in people, but it provides resistance to smallpox. This produces long-lasting, strong immune response. Now, there's a disadvantage here. These are not safe for immunocompromised individuals. So somebody who's on immunosuppressants because they got a heart transplant, somebody who's taking chemotherapy, somebody who's HIV positive and their immune system has shrunk. Jerry.
So I have a question.
Yes.
I guess it's a bit personal, but I share. So my aunt that got the heart transplant has cancer. So I'm like, damn, this is double diminishing her immune system. So what do you say about that, if anything? They told her to stop smoking cigarettes, and she almost didn't get the heart transplant because she smoked cigarettes, but she finagled her way through. But then look what happened a few years later. The cigarettes caught up with her, presumably, because no one in my family has cancer ever, not one person. So, and it's lung cancer from cigarettes.
Oh yeah.
So that's tough for her, right? Because she can't
That's
get chemo with rejection medicine.
yeah, that's really a complicated medical
You took your
situation.
glasses off. I can tell it's complicated.
My educated guess is that they will be monitoring her immune system very, very closely during this process.
Yeah.
They do that anyway when people are on chemotherapy or on immunosuppressants.
Wow.
So what they'll do is adjust her medication in response to how her immune system is acting.
Right. Cheers.
Yeah, but that's rough, and I'm sorry to hear that, because that's rough.
We told her though. I mean, she chose her fate. Like, stop smoking cigarettes, lady.
But it's incredibly hard to stop smoking cigarettes.
Yeah, liquor and cigarettes, the things we can buy in the store, kill more people than the illegal drugs by many times fold. So it's an odd thing. But anyway, I was wondering. I was like, you know what? Let me ask Professor Davis. She would know.
Yeah. Smoking is just such a big killer,
Right.
Such a huge killer. I mean, my dad died of lung cancer, lifelong smoker, quit multiple times, had 3 bouts with cancer, and it was the last bout that killed him. So yeah, I'm a big anti-smoker person.
And essentially, what is the nicotine or the tar or whatever the thousands of chemicals in a cigarette? What are they mutating your cells? Is that what's happening?
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not sure. There are multiple chemicals in cigarettes that cause mutations. And cancer happens when you get enough genetic mutations in the right types of cells. And when you do that, the cells are now mutated, they divide out of control and can spread.
You don't have enough space in your body.
Right. And they use up the resources, they use up the energy, they crowd out other organs. Yeah, there's a lot there.
I mean, when you and I grew up, they were still smoking indoors. I remember, like, sit on this half of the room. What is that? We're in the same air, guys.
Airplanes too.
Yeah, the recirculated air in the death tube. That's what an airplane is to me, a death tube. But why don't they put parachutes on those? I don't know. I hate airplanes more than anything. But nonetheless, yeah, airplanes, all of that. So whoever, Al Gore, whoever it was, thank you. Secondhand, because they did the stats on secondhand smoking. It was just gross how many people died from that. Children, a lot of people with their grandparents, and they would be babysat, and just, the secondhand smoke was equivalent to half a pack of smoking a cigarette or what have you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nasty stuff, really is.
It is.
Well, I never picked up that habit. It's disgusting.
Yeah. And sadly, vaping, you're still getting a lot of those chemicals in
the
your
hookah too. The hookah, the new trendy thing, the relatively new. It's like 1 billion cigarettes, and you're hookahing for an hour. You go pay and rent it for an hour. You take a week off of your life.
And folks, if you like to enjoy the marijuana, go with edibles.
Seriously, yeah. I have
Smoking.
asthma, but I like, getting a little high, and I just eat the chocolates, the gummies, and it's
They
way
got
easier to
dosage.
measure
They
the
got dosage
dosage.
now.
So yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Professor, all the way.
Woo, sidetracked.
Right,
Okay.
Went from cancer to pot real
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah, real fast. Yeah, after starting to teach younger college students, I've learned a lot about the street drugs, and some of them should be legal, like marijuana, and some of them should never be legal, like heroin.
No, it's the new heroin, fentanyl.
Oh, fentanyl. Yeah.
Heroin anymore. Heroin's not around. It's fentanyl.
Well, that
The
stuff's in
theory of-
everything. And people, I don't want to get too in depth, but my brother, he had a Xanax addiction. And I'd say about 75% of those pills on the street are pressed. They're not like
Yeah.
actual prescribed medicines. They just take like a Lazopram powder, pressed into a pill. But a lot of them are like sprinkled in with fentanyl, and most people don't even know it.
Which is anesthesia, if people didn't know. It's literally meant to stop your your nervous system. From
Yeah, I
working.
think it's like
It'll
10
slow you
times
down.
more powerful than morphine. So, I mean, it's
Right.
dangerous.
All right, guys. We spent a little bit too much time
Yeah,
off
yeah.
topic here.
Sorry about
Yeah, I like to tell people that if you're buying your drugs on the street, you're trusting your drug dealer. Okay, so live attenuated vaccines. Let me add some examples here. So the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine contains live attenuated virus, and the chickenpox vaccine contains live attenuated virus. So those are examples of it. We can also think of smallpox in this category, even though that's using a different disease, a different virus. Okay. Killed whole cell. It's exactly what it sounds like. You take the bacteria or the virus and you kill it. There's no replication. It can not cause disease. It's dead. You can't cause a disease with this. The immune response tends to be weaker. It may require multiple shots, and the immunity does not last as long. So it's not as good of a immune response as you get from live attenuated. But some diseases, are too deadly to use a live attenuated vaccine. So killed whole cells, things like influenza and cholera. Okay. Oops, didn't mean to change that to red. Shoot. Toxoid. So some bacteria produce toxins, things that are released from the bacteria that attack your cells. And so toxoid vaccines are against the toxin produced by the bacteria. So the bacteria itself does its damage by using toxins. If it doesn't produce the toxins, or if you fight against the toxins, you're not going to have a severe illness and your immune system can handle it. So these are things like diphtheria and tetanus. So tetanus is the it releases a toxin that causes uncontrolled muscle contractions. I think I've mentioned it before. These muscle contractions can be so strong you break bones. It's just a horrible disease. You want to make sure you're up to date on your tetanus vaccination because you do not want this. So that's basically toxoid. Relatively simple. Juliana, go ahead.
I just want to say, when you're saying to the tetanus, you're referring to like the Tdap shot, right?
Yes. Tdap is tetanus. I'm pretty sure that's diphtheria and then pertussis, which is whooping cough. So it's several different things in one vaccine. Nate.
Just real quick, tetanus. Now, does it come from like rusted metal or just any mineral in general?
It's not the rust, it's not the mineral. Tetanus comes from a bacteria that is what's called anaerobic.
No air or
No air, exactly. So it lives in the soil. It's always in the soil, but it's not going to get through your skin and infect you. It has to go into a wound that doesn't have exposure to oxygen. So that's why we say rusty nails. They tend to be, it doesn't matter if they're rusty. That's not the important part. The important part is that they are in the soil. They can have the bacteria on the surface. And if you step on one, it makes a very deep puncture wound where you don't get a lot of oxygen deep in that wound.
And is the shot given after exposure or is it, so then it's like a retroviral vaccine or
It's, well,
kind of
no.
like a rabies shot or, sorry, I know I'm throwing a lot at you.
Yeah. And Juliana's got her hand up again. So I'll get to you in a second, Juliana.
I just wanted to say that I had the Tdap shot recently, and it's just a vaccine. It's just like I didn't get any like symptoms for it or anything. It's just like a regular vaccine.
Yeah, most people just get a sore arm. We generally give a tetanus or Tdap. Tdap is just one type of tetanus vaccine. We generally give those to people every 10 years as a prophylactic measure, trying to prevent a problem. But if you step on a piece of metal and get a deep puncture wound, call your doctor, get a booster. Speaking of which, I think I'm due for a booster. Because you have time to stop the toxin before it causes symptoms. It's not a fast problem, and so you have the time to get an immune response. If you get exposed to something like measles, you don't really have a long time period between the exposure and disease symptoms. So you need the vaccine beforehand. Rabies is a special case. Rabies, it infects the immune system. The nervous system. And so it causes most of its damage when it reaches the brain. But it can't travel through the nervous system quickly. It takes a while to get from the location of the bite to your brain. So you have a window of time after exposure where you can get the vaccine and stop it from reaching the brain. Because once the rabies virus reaches the brain, you're in trouble. You're in a lot of trouble.
I think I was reading like there's only like been 2 people ever who have survived like post rabies infection. I don't know if that number's still accurate, but sometimes I get curious. I just Google diseases and stuff.
That number is a little bit outdated. So I think we're up to 5 people who have survived rabies after they've started showing symptoms, after it's reached the brain. 5. And rabies kills lots of people around the world. If you have been bitten by an animal and you don't know if that animal got a rabies vaccine, yeah, you want to look into getting the vaccine. Some animals are much less likely to get to have rabies. So things like possums almost never get rabies. You get bitten by a possum, what the hell were you doing? Don't snuggle possums. They're not very aggressive.
They also eat ticks too. They're wonderful for getting rid of pests. So don't kill them. Just let them go.
Yeah. They're good little wild animals to have around. If you get bitten by a fox or a skunk or a feral dog, that's a problem. The weirdest one, the weirdest one I heard about several years ago, one person got bitten by a rabid cow. Yeah, so the cow got exposed to rabies and then bit somebody, but
Now, I know you briefly spoke about prions. Are they kind of similar to how rabies works in terms of the brain, or is prion specifically spongification and rabies is more of like an inflammation of the brain?
yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Prions are spongification. They're very weird. They're not contagious from person to person. You either get them through genetic mutations or by eating them. Rabies goes in and it causes inflammation in the brain, and it infects and kills cells, but not in that spongiform fashion that the prions kill cells. Yeah. And of course, once brain cells are dead, they're gone. You know, if it had a memory, that memory is gone. If it knew how to do a task, that task is gone. So protect the brain, very important. Okay. I'm going to have to erase some of this. So if you want a screenshot, component vaccines use part of a virus or bacteria. So usually a surface protein or antigen and this kind of response stops the virus or bacteria from infecting cells. So it's a slightly different part of the process, but it is very safe because it's just part of a virus or part of a bacteria. This is not long lasting, and you may need boosters. So these are for like whooping cough or pertussis. So when I talked about the tetanus vaccine and we expanded it to Tdap, the part against tetanus is a toxoid vaccine. The part against pertussis is a component vaccine, but they combine them and give them as one shot because your immune response lasts a similar amount of time. And you don't end up with a strong immune response or a strong problem with them interfering with each other. There's also hepatitis B and shingles. So remember, chickenpox was a live attenuated vaccine. Shingles is caused by the same virus, but it's a different disease. Have I talked about shingles at all yet? Yes, good. Thanks. And then there are the conjugate vaccines. These are the ones that are commonly used against bacteria. So we haven't really talked about this, but bacteria are good at evading the immune response. And the reason they are good at this is instead of just having proteins on the surface, they have sugars or carbohydrates on their cell surface. So they have proteins, but they also have these carbohydrates. And carbohydrates do not cause a strong immune response. Our immune response works really, really well against proteins, not very much against sugars or carbohydrates. So to make an immune response against a sugar or carbohydrate, they attach that carb to something called a conjugate. The conjugate is a protein that triggers a strong immune response. Things like the tetanus toxoid antigen. So they'll have a carbohydrate attached to a tetanus toxoid antigen. Your immune system freaks out over the tetanus, and you end up with a stronger response to the carbohydrate or sugar. And so now you have an immune response to that carbohydrate or sugar. These are relatively new, and I don't have a great example of one to give you because they're not in widespread use yet. All right. Whew. We're going to have to get to mRNA next time. I know it's the one everybody's been waiting for.
What about vector vaccines?
Vector vaccines. I'm going to have to look at that one because I'm not quite sure what you're referring to there. So I'll do some research and look that up.
Yeah, it's on hhs.gov.
Okay.
Viral vector vaccines use a modified version of a different virus as a vector to deliver protection. Several different viruses have been used as vector, including the influenza. There's a lot of lists in there, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's a delivery method.
But you have the answer already then.
Yeah, but everyone else doesn't know that, so I like to enlighten. I'm a benevolent being.
Apparently Nate and I are co-teaching now.
Yeah, I see that. Nonetheless, see you guys next week. I gotta go.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye,
Take care.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.